Rachel Biale grew up in a kibbutz in Israel. She earned a BA and MA in Jewish history at UCLA and a Master of Social Work from Yeshiva University. She is the author of the pathbreaking book Women and Jewish Law 1984, a memoir growing up below sea level, a Kibbutz Childhood 2018, a historical novel Lost and Found 2020, a joint memoir with her husband, Aerogram Across the Ocean, a love story in letters 1970 to 1972. And now, Love Can Begin, my Parents Imagined Memoir 1945 to 1946, as well as What Now, 2 minute tip for solving common parenting challenges. She has worked in the San Francisco Bay Area Jewish community for over 4 decades and until very recently served as executive director of new Lehrhaus, the Bay Area hub for adult Jewish learning. She also works as a parenting consultant and coach, practicing for over 40 years. And in today's episode of Auto Interview, it's my utmost pleasure, joy and excitement and honor as well to have on the show today, Rachel Biale. How are you doing today, Rachel? It's lovely to have you on today.
Thank you so much. It's a delight to be on your program. I'm honored and touched that my book somehow reached England and that we get to talk today. As you mentioned in my bio, I've written a fair number of books. I mean,
Absolutely.
one could say it's quite the hodgepodge because it's from history to
Yeah.
women in Jewish law to parenting advice. That's me. I'm kind of all over the place. Things grab my interest, my professional development, and I go with them.
That's amazing, actually. Your bio is quite an inspiring one. It's really a beautiful and quite awesome one. So, thank you very much once again for joining in today. We are going to get into what inspired you to write Lost and Found, which is where I would like to start with. But then, you've been a writer now for the past amazing 40 years, and you've published multiple titles aside from Lost and Found. I wanted to ask you, what is your first creative spark as a writer? What is that thing that fuels you in to write and get on this beautiful literature journey? And also, why did you choose this title, Lost and Found, which I found to be so uncommon, so exceptional, and quite interesting? It's also compelling because if I to be a new reader with the Lost and Found, book in front of me in a bookshelf, for instance, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm gonna have to pick this and see what exactly is imbibed in it. So if you can run us through, I know I've got a lot in there actually for a starter. But if you can run us through the making of all of this, that'll be great.
Okay, so let me start with the title because that's where we ended. So, this book is about a lost child who is then found in several different ways. And I think that we all have personal experience of loss and then finding our way out of that.
Absolutely.
So when I came up with that title, I actually Googled it. It turns out you cannot copyright a book title, and there are actually several others, including about losing weight and losing this and finding this. But
Mm.
I just love the title, and I just felt that it kind of captures, in a very short way, what my book is about.
Mm.
So what kept, each book has its own starting point, as I'm sure you and your listeners know, just like many other things in life, there's a starting point which often you don't realize until you've already been on the journey.
Yeah.
In this case, the starting point was a story that I heard. So the background is this is a story of a family that is on a refugee boat
Mm.
escaping Nazi occupied Europe and going to Palestine, which at
Wow.
the time was under British mandate, and where there was a mixed community of Jews, Palestinian Arabs, some of them Muslims, some of them Christian, as well as many other small Christian communities
Wow.
around monasteries and churches. So it's a very mixed community. My parents were on that boat along with the family that's described in the novel.
Wow.
And 70 years after the event of the novel, which is that when they finally arrive at the shores of Palestine, they're transferred to a much larger ship to be deported. to Mauritius, of all places, a small island 300 kilometers east of Madagascar. So
Mm,
probably not too many people have been there. Anyway, there was a prison there for illegal refugees. I think the resonance with today's reality is kind of frightening, actually.
mm,
And as this family got on the boat and lined up to be registered, there was an explosion and the boat sank in
wow,
the harbor. And they had a 4-year child and a newborn baby, and the 4-year child disappeared.
wow.
7 years later, my mother, who was on that boat, also gets a call from somebody who says, "My name is so and so, but you don't know me." My mother at the time is like 85, she says, or even older. She says, "If I don't know you, why are you calling me?" And he
Mm,
said, "I heard that you were on the Atlantic, which is the boat that takes."
wow.
And he said, "Do you remember that a baby was born on the ship?" And she says, "Yes, I remember it very well. My mother had phenomenal memory." And he says, "I'm that baby. And
Wow.
I want to come and talk to you because my parents died when I was a very small child, and there
Oh,
was a whole
God.
uh, drama, and I want to learn about it." So he came and he told her a story, which she then told me about how he was a baby, his older brother disappeared in the explosion. And at the time, he told my mother that 4 years later, he appeared at their door
Oh,
and had amnesia and couldn't tell them where he had been. And
wow.
when I heard that story, I just could not stop thinking about it. And I couldn't stop
Mm,
telling it to the extent that I knew. And then I said, I have to write this down. And I have to use my imagination. That's
mm,
what started that book. But in addition, I had the first part of the book describes the journey from Europe to Palestine, and I had my mother's diary, which she wrote while on this boat, with very detailed description of what life was like on this incredibly overcrowded boat, where they ran out of food, they ran out of medicine, etc.
mm.
So it was both the personal connection, but also this remarkable story about a lost child.
Wow. I must say that that's such a pulling story that you've got in there. That is so pulling. That is so emotional. And I can
Mhm.
imagine how that feels like, all these years of searching, all these years of separation. And it
Mhm.
is such a pulling story you've shared. And I love that statement you make. Everyone has had an experience of loss, which is so true and so vivid. So thank you very much, Rachel, for sharing this incredibly amazing story with us. Now I
Thank
want to
you.
continue because the book deals with loss, resilience, and rediscovery.
Yes.
Which theme do you feel resonates most deeply with you as the author? And also, your characters feel like they carry echoes of real lives. Were any of them inspired by people you knew or stories passed down in your community?
Yes. So I think loss and recovery for me go together. I've
Yeah.
had some serious loss in my own personal life, and I'm always amazed by how the human spirits somehow manages small ways and sometimes big leaps in recovery. So that's what inspires me. Um, on the same level, I can't imagine what it's like to lose a child who disappears and you don't know, are they alive?
Or
Did they
dead?
die? Did they drown in the explosion on the boat? And you
Hmm.
have to somehow come to terms with it, but you don't know.
Wow.
Um, in terms of the personal connection, so I met both the baby in the story as well as the 4-year-old who disappeared, but 70 years later.
Hmm.
So I just met them for the sake of hearing their story more fully. The really personal connection is my parents who were on that boat. So the family in this story is from Vienna. I grew
Hmm.
up with Jewish immigrants who had grown up in Austrian German culture. So I don't want to type them, but I knew the type. I knew how they talk. I knew how they see the world. And I had the personal stories and diary of, as I mentioned, of my mother who was on the boat there. In addition to that, so I'm not going to give out too much, but the
Yeah.
first third of the book is completely historical, based on the true story of this family and of my mother recounting of the voyage.
Wow.
After the child disappears, we don't know what happened to him, and there's two completely fictional possibilities of what happened to them.
Mm.
Uh, so I'm going to give away a little bit. One of them is that he is found after the explosion by a Palestinian fisherman, because of course at the time that area, the city of Haifa, the part near the port was inhabited mostly by Palestinians, and many of
Yeah.
them were fishermen.
Oh.
Um, and the child is mute and all bruised from having been thrown off the boat, and this family tries to find out who this child is, but they can't figure it out, so they adopt him. I had a good friend and colleague who is a Palestinian from the Galilee, and I
Mm.
asked him a lot of questions about what that family would be like. I also did a lot of historical research. That's, a given. But the personal connection is to this friend Muhammad, who told me a lot about his family. And I
Mm.
used some of what he told me about his family in the village in the Galilee when this fisherman and his wife go back to their village and meet with his family. The other option is that he's found and then raised in a Carmelite monastery. There were a lot of
Wow.
Christian monasteries in Palestine at the time by the monks.
Mm.
And that's not my background, but I have a friend here in Berkeley who is a Dominican nun, and I met with
Oh.
her and I said, this is the basic story. Help me understand what it would mean to a monk who has taken a vow of chastity and
Mm.
poverty to raise a child and to become more and more attached to him and to begin to experience fatherly feelings. What did it mean to him religiously
Mm.
as a monk? And she was very helpful that way as well.
Wow, that is such an emotional story you've shared with us. I like how the story has been layered and how it's beautiful transition in this captivating and very pulling manner. Wow, that's such a lot you've shared in there. Thank you very much for sharing with us. And if you have a copy of the book, I know you have some behind you. I just like you to show it to the camera much closely. Oh, and that, look, it's so beautiful. And it's quite voluminous even.
Yeah, yeah, the warning to potential readers, it's almost 500 pages. But
Oh,
there's pictures.
amazing.
And
Oh.
what I wanted to say about the image, let me show it to you again. So the child is lost from the explosion, but somehow gets to the dock and
Mm.
is lost on the dock. I wanted a picture of a child seemingly alone and lost
Mm.
on something that could be a dock.
Wow.
So
Wow.
I searched the internet. I found this image. This is a much more contemporary image. The child was wearing a jean jacket, which they didn't have in 1940, but I
Mm.
had my designer darken it so it's not obvious that it's a
Yeah.
Levi's jeans
Yeah.
jacket. And it captures this sort of mood of where is he going? Why
Mm.
is he alone? Who's going to find him? Who's going to take care of him?
Absolutely. Wow. Wow. Thank you very. This is such an amazing story you've shared. Thank you very much for sharing. Thank you.
Let me say one more thing that's also a little bit of maybe telling a little too much, but if
Yeah.
people do decide to read it. So after he disappears, as I mentioned, there's two possible stories of who finds him and who takes care of him and
Yeah.
how he is, how it resolves.
Mm.
And it's a little bit confusing because you read one version, you say, okay, so that's what happened. And then the next chapter, something different happened at the same
Mm.
time. And
Wow.
I'm hoping is that the experience of the reader is, I guess we don't know what happened.
Wow.
These possible imagined narratives, but we don't know what happened.
Don't know
And
what.
that feeling of not knowing what happened, what really happened, is
Mm.
something that this child lived with his whole life.
Mm.
So I wanted to
Wow.
somehow create that experience for the reader that we don't know. And that's really hard to take in.
Mm. Absolutely. Oh, wow. That is such a pulling story you've got in there. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. And I also wanted to ask you, Rachel, in what ways do you hope the book contributes to our readers understand Jewish history,
Yeah.
displacement and survival, and also given the time and setting? Some readers may wonder, does the novel touch on or connect to the Holocaust in some ways? Just curious.
So, of course, the basic story are people who are fleeing Europe because it's been occupied by the Nazis.
Yeah.
And yes, there's references, but it's not the main story. I would say it's the background, but I think I'm
Mm,
hoping that what people would understand in our current political climate, which I don't want to get into in detail, but that people will understand the Jewish experience
yeah.
of destruction and fleeing for your life, and arriving in a country that's not hospitable
Mm,
because
absolutely.
the not this family, but the majority of the people who arrived,
Yeah.
my parents included, were essentially captured on the boats and deported to Mauritius, where they were imprisoned by the
Mm,
British. Um, so I hope that people understand that. I also hope that people get a sense that, especially Haifa, which is the port town in the north, was a very multi-religious, multicultural, multi-ethnic group with a
mm,
lot of tension because this was a period of a lot of political tension. Both the Palestinian community and the Jewish community were resisting the British mandate. They were also fighting among each other. So it's a very fraught political time. And of course, World War II is going on.
yeah.
Uh, but it was a community in which people's lives did intersect and people did live with each other to the
Mm,
extent that it was possible. But there are certainly many clouds. And I hope that people get a sense of that historical moment.
wow. Thank you very much for sharing that. That is so helpful. Thank you. And your novel blends history with storytelling. How did you decide what to keep rooted in real event and where to let fiction take the lead? How did you decide that balance between the two?
Yes, because obviously there's a lot of historical background that I need to somehow bring into the picture without it
Yeah.
sounding like a history lesson.
Yeah.
I think the key to that is to think about what did this historical situation or event mean to this specific person that I've made up, but he's based on a certain kind of person that lived there at the time.
Mm,
So, let's take as an example. So, this ship that was going to deport all these people explodes and sinks in the harbor. Um, and it's in the context of Jewish refugees from Europe trying to enter Palestine without papers that allows them to enter it. So
mm,
I'm looking at specifically what does it mean to this family. Also, what does it mean to the monk and the abbot of the monastery to see refugees being turned away? How do they react from their point of view of their religious obligation to feed the hungry and take care of the poor and the desolate? So that's how I think about how you integrate the history.
that's a beautiful one too. That's an amazing answer you've got to that. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. And also, I understand that the book has a personal layer as well. I mean, from all you've been sharing so far, it does as a personal layer. Now, in what way does the story connect with your own parent experiences, if in any way? You mentioned also that it's some parts are like real and other parts are like fiction, etc. So, in what way does the book connect to your own parents' experiences?
Yeah. So my parents fled from Czechoslovakia, from Prague, but
Oh,
they were
wow.
on on the boat. There were three boats that left Romania at the same time with Jewish refugees.
Wow.
Um, uh, Czechoslovakia, Austria, mostly Vienna, and Poland, mostly
Mm,
Danzig. And so just right there on these boats that were incredibly crowded, my parents, these were cargo ships, not passenger ships that had been
Oh,
retrofitted. On each boat there were about 1,500 people.
wow.
Comfortably, those boats could accommodate maybe 100 people. So
Mm,
my mother would describe, for example, there was the problem, excuse me, but going to the bathroom. The bathroom was a plank that was extended over the edge of the boat. So you did your business, it dropped into the sea. There were fabric partitions.
wow.
That was, but if everybody went when they wanted to, it would be complete mayhem. So
Yeah.
the kind of young people on the boat that took a leadership position, they organized a line. You have to start at this point and go clockwise and follow the line and get in the line an hour before you think you're going to need to go to the bathroom because that's how long it might take you.
Wow.
So in the novel, the pregnant woman who is about to give birth on the boat,
Wow.
she get herself to the bathroom and she can't no longer climb up the stairs. So she goes in the middle of the night with the help of her husband in order to be able to get to the bathroom. So those kind of
Wow.
little details that my parents lived through and that are described in my mother's diary.
Oh,
So when I wrote the first draft of the novel, my mother was alive. I showed it to her and she read the whole part describing the boat. And she said to me, "But I was on that boat, not you," which told me that I really, really captured what
you
it
did
was
a
like
great
for me.
job.
So,
For her to be able to say that shows that you
yeah.
did a great job.
And my father, as a young man, was very involved. At a certain point in the journey, the sailors who were Greek sailors
Mm.
heard on the radio that Italy had declared war on Greece, and they
Wow.
got terrified that they would get caught in the sea and be tried for treason or whatever or captured.
Mm.
They started out by throwing all the coal overboard and then escaping in the lifeboats. So the next morning, the refugees find themselves with no coal and no crew, and they had to somehow try to navigate the boat by themselves. My father was among the young men who were trying to feed the turbines. And once they ran out of the little bit of coal that was left, they started hacking down everything that was made from wood, the
Wow.
stairs, the banisters, a piano. These are all
Mm.
things that my mother described to me, and my father actually got severely burnt.
Wow.
Opened the door of the furnace, and a steam cloud came to
Oh,
his face.
wow.
And he wrote a fictional story, but it's clearly autobiographical about a man who gets his face burnt. And I have that in his
Oh,
writing, so I use
oh,
that.
wow. That's a whole roller coaster of experiences. That's
Yeah.
a lot of experiences. And I love your mother's commendation in there that she was the one on the boat, not you. It shows that you really captured it quite beautifully and
Yeah.
quite frankly as well. And I
Yeah.
must say that is really a lot of experiences. Well, thank you for having all of these things in writing, which I think it's very important. And I wanted to ask you now, what kind of feedback have you gotten so far since the books have been published? And which one do
Yeah.
you love the most out of the feedbacks you've gotten?
So, uh, three kinds I would point out. One is people who loved it said, "This is a movie. It's
Oh,
so dramatic. It's
mm,
so, you give us such a visual sense of what it was like on that boat and
yeah.
what it was like for the child hiding on the deck in a broken box."
Mm,
Um, that was one very appreciated. The other one was some people midway told me, "I'm confused because there are two different stories here." And
huh,
I would say, yeah, keep going because that is the point, as I mentioned a little earlier in the interview. For
mm,
you, you need to be confused and to get that experience of we don't know what happened. And the
yeah.
third one is some people ask me, is this an allegory for the fate of Palestine, which is torn between the Palestinians and the Jews? I said, no, it's not an allegory. It's a life story.
Mm,
But it does capture that moment of unclarity of who's going to have this land, which we're still in.
right.
We're still
Mm,
in this moment of needing to find a way. Now I'm going to get a little contemporary, needing to find a way to share this land. As in the
Mm,
story, these families need to find a way to return this boy to his parents.
mm. Wow. This is such an amazing one. This is great stories you've shared. I really appreciate these beautiful responses actually that you've gotten on the books. That's amazing one, really. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. And another thing I'd like to ask you, which I find to be
Mhm.
quite interesting about writing, is are there any challenges you experience, while writing this book, while putting the whole story together? Did you at any point in time get stuck? Did you at some point have to pause and think, should I add this? Should I remove this? What is the writing process like for
Yeah,
you? Was it a smooth ride or was it a bit challenging for you?
both. I mean, I felt like I was on a train, that the story was carrying me forward. But there would be moments where I would get the story to a certain point, and I would say, now something has to happen to pivot
Yeah.
in the direction that I want to go, but I
Mm,
don't know what it is. And at
mm,
first, I sort of tried to kind of force it, and then I realized that if I just let it go, then by the next day it pops into my head. What's going to happen? Or similarly, I would get to a point, I say about, let's say, the mother who's lost her child, what would she say in this moment? And it would just come to me in a voice that I was hearing in my head of this mother that I
yeah.
obviously love greatly, and this
Mm,
father who I love as well, and he's emotionally much more constricted. And
mm,
there are moments of great tension between them because, as everybody knows, when you're struck by a terrible loss and you're a couple, it's very hard to navigate together
yeah.
because each person reacts differently. So I try to capture some of that. So there were moments where I would think to myself, what would this mother say? That was a little easier for me as a mother. And then I would think, what would this father, who is emotionally very restrained, what would he say? And what I found is that just waiting a
Mm,
day, sometimes only a few hours, sometimes a couple of days, it would kind of come to me, and I would feel, yeah, that's exactly what he would say. That's exactly what he would do. Um, the other issue was, where do you end the story? I'm not going to tell how it ends because that's, but I had a different ending which
wow.
tied it together a little bit more neatly. And then I
Oh.
decided to abandon it because it doesn't need to be tied up to the very last note. You need to actually leave the reader to say,
Mm.
I see what's going to happen, but now I'm going to imagine it in my own heart.
Wow, this is such an I love your answers to these questions. Everything so far has been so fun, quite interesting and very great. Thank you.
Let me just maybe add one more comment that one of my careers was as a therapist. And I
Oh,
worked very closely, especially with parents of young children. So
oh,
at the time I was writing my novel, my kids were already grown. But I was working as a consultant and a coach with parents of 4-year-olds. And
oh,
that was very helpful because it kind of helped me remind me what a 4-year-old would say. So there's a moment in which this refugee boat is approaching the coast of Palestine. And
oh,
all the refugees stand on deck
mm,
and they see the coastline and they cry. And the
wow,
little 4-year-old boy says to his mother, "Why are they crying?" And
mm,
she says, he says, "Why are they sad? Why are they crying? Is something bad happening?" She said, "No, they're crying because they're happy." And
really?
he's, "Why do people cry when they're happy?" And she says, "That's a good question. Nobody knows."
Wow,
So that's, something that I drew from my own experience working with very young children and their parents. That's
wow,
a 4-year-old child would say, who saw somebody crying in joy, would say, "Why are you Because they think that you cry when you're sad or when you're hurt,
wow,
crying." And the truth is, we don't really know.
wow, wow. That is such An amazing share you've given us. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. And just apart from Lost and Found, do you have any other works you're currently working on?
So I am not working on the book right now. I did publish very recently. Okay, let me give you a little. So in 2020, my husband and I published a joint memoir called
Wow.
Aerograms Across the Ocean, which is based on 258 love letters that we exchanged between summer 1970 and 19 and July 72. And it's
Oh,
basically
wow.
the story of our romance in letters. If you have any older participants here, they might remember aerograms. There are these blue thin paper things that you would write a letter and then you would fold it to make it into an envelope. In the day of email, nobody knows what that is, but that's what it was.
Mm,
And the memoir was sections from the letters at the time,
wow.
from 1970 to 72, and then kind of 50 years later, talking back to ourselves and saying things
Wow.
like, sometimes like, little did I know that when I said that was going to become a major theme in my life. Or
Mm,
I write about this event as if it was incredibly memorable. I don't remember it at all anymore.
no
So
anymore,
just this interplay between ourselves now and then. And after I
Mm,
did that, my parents exchanged 100 love letters
wow.
between September 1945 and July 1946.
Wow.
So I wrote an imagined
Now luck
memoir
can
as I
begin.
was writing in their voices, the same kind of idea, which is that I have sections from their actual letters. I have all the letters. And then I have what I imagined they would have said 50 years later. And then on
Mm,
occasion, I actually interject my own voice, sometimes to
mm.
give a little historical background to explain why I'm saying, and sometimes to say things like, I think my father is not being totally honest with himself about how he feels about this. So it was like a multivocal conversation between my imagined parents and myself and them and their own letters.
Wow.
So that's what I've been up to, and I do plan to write another book, but I don't know what it'll be yet.
I like the fact that you had to share all those stories with us. They are so fun to hear you talk about, and it's so fun to listen to you talk about them. Quite amazing. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Just in case we have some viewers who are currently watching this interview and would love to get a copy of Lost and Found or any of your books, on what platforms are they available on for purchase?
Despite my reservations, they're always available on Amazon, and that's the easiest way to get them. For people in England,
Mm.
there used to be a wonderful organization called Book Depository,
Oh,
which distributed books in England and Europe, but they were bought up by Amazon.
oh, really?
So I don't think they exist anymore. And depending on what country you're in, it's either very easy to order books from Amazon or it's a little cumbersome.
Yeah, it's Amazon
Um,
is the best to be fair, really. It's much easier.
it's
Thank
the
you.
easiest.
Yeah.
Or you can go to your local bookstore and ask them, and they'll order it. All these books are print on demand.
Oh, okay.
So basically, if you go to a bookstore and order it, the bookstore will have it a week later.
Interesting. That's amazing. And I left a link in the description part of this interview where interested viewers can get a copy of Rachel Biale books directly on Amazon, on our website, and also on other platforms. I also left a link to Rachel's social media pages for possible followings. So thank you so much, Rachel, for sitting down with me to talk about this beautiful, engrossing, compelling story that you've got. And also, this is so interesting. I enjoyed it wholeheartedly, and I'm sure the viewers do as well. And thank you once again for taking the time to come up and share your story with us. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you so much for inviting me, for your very thoughtful, penetrating questions that gave me an opportunity to think deeply about what I try to do.
Yeah.
If there are any viewers that want to ask me questions, I have a website. It's rachelbiale.com. And you
Mm,
can contact me through the website with a question about any of my books,
okay.
about this book. If you do read any of them and want to write to me with comments, I would greatly appreciate it.
That's amazing as well. Thank you.